I thought my fight ended on the battlefield, but nothing prepared me for the war waiting at home: betrayal, desperation, and a plan so twisted, it put my own daughter's life at risk. This time, failure wasn't an option. The road that brought me here wasn't paved with glory. It was laid with quiet determination and harsh lessons. When I enlisted in the Marines, it wasn't out of patriotism or some sense of familial duty. It was about escaping, a desperate need to break free from the monotony of small-town life. Back home, the air in my father's garage reeked of oil and unfulfilled dreams, while my mother's hands told a story of years spent working tirelessly, yet never seeing prosperity. I'd seen what staying put could do to people, and I refused to let that be my future. Boot camp tore me down, dismantling everything I thought I was, only to rebuild me into someone I hardly recognized. I became a man who lived by precision, discipline, and the necessity of detachment. I learned how to move unnoticed, endure discomfort without complaint, and calculate a perfect shot under unimaginable pressure. The first time I pulled the trigger on the range, something inside me clicked. Shooting wasn't just a skill, it felt like a calling. My first deployment was nothing like I imagined. Any illusions of heroism vanished in the harsh reality of war. It wasn't the cinematic, glorified version you see on TV. It was chaotic. It was brutal. I saw men cry out for their mothers and heard the hollow, bitter laughter of those who'd survived yet another close call. Fear and guilt weren't things you could avoid, they were always there, just under the surface. But I learned how to bury them deep enough to function. Over time, I gained a reputation as a sniper. It wasn't pride that drove me, but the understanding that every target I neutralized could mean saving the lives of those fighting alongside me. One day, a file landed on my lap, a dossier labeled Falcon. My directive was clear: neutralize the threat. Falcon wasn't my first target, but his reputation made this mission stand out. It wasn't just the Marines who wanted him gone. The people of the region, the ones who had suffered under his reign, demanded justice. I spent weeks studying Falcon. Every movement he made, every pattern he followed, was carefully analyzed. Falcon wasn't careless, he was elusive, a shadow. My team and I pieced together fragments of intel, whispers, and clues, which eventually led us to a remote compound in the heart of the desert. As I lay in the oppressive heat, my rifle steady, my thoughts wandered to the lives Falcon had ruined. This wasn't about revenge or even duty anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of suffering. Over the years, each mission had toughened me, but this one felt heavier. It wasn't the rifle weighing me down or the relentless sun beating against my back, it was the stakes. I knew this mission could be my last. Failure wasn't an option. As I adjusted the scope, scanning the compound for the faintest sign of my target, I wasn't thinking about medals or recognition. My focus was singular: the lives I could save by ending Falcon's reign. He wasn't thinking about medals or accolades. He was thinking about Emily, his daughter, and the kind of world he wanted her to grow up in. As he lay half buried in the merciless Afghan desert, the sun beat down on him, blistering his back while the grit of sand worked its way into every crevice of his gear. The days were unbearably hot, the nights bone-chilling, but Fran had grown accustomed to the desert's brutal rhythms. For 6 hours, he lay motionless, his camouflage net offering little relief from the relentless sun. Sweat traced lines down his back, pooling in the folds of his uniform, but he didn't dare flinch. Out here, any movement could mean the end. Through the precision of his rifle scope, Fran focused on the decaying structure in the distance. Intelligence had confirmed it as the hideout of a militant leader known only by the codename Falcon. For months, Falcon had eluded capture, leaving a trail of destruction and loss in his wake. Fran didn't care about the man's real name, it was irrelevant. What mattered was the carnage that would end today. Wind shift, 1 o'clock. Light breeze, Corporal Hernandez, his spotter, whispered through the earpiece. Fran made a slight adjustment to his scope, his crosshairs trained on the compound's doorway. Falcon hadn't shown himself yet, but Fran knew patience was key. The desert was deceptive, a master of illusions. Heat waves created mirages that distorted everything, while ants crawled relentlessly through his gear. He endured it all without a twitch. Movement wasn't an option. Time crawled. Then, the doorway stirred. "Two tangos," Hernandez reported softly. Fran's finger hovered over the trigger as two armed men stepped into view. Neither was Falcon. He exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steady, his hands unwavering. Minutes turned into eternity before the doorway stirred again. This time, Falcon emerged. Through the scope, Fran saw the face from the dossier, sharp features, cold and cruel eyes that had haunted countless lives. "That's him," Hernandez confirmed. Range, 800 meters. Wind, 2 o'clock, 3 knots. Fran adjusted his aim with practiced precision. A deep breath in. The world narrowed to just him, his rifle, and Falcon. One pull of the trigger, and it was over. The shot echoed for a split second before silence reclaimed the desert. Target eliminated, Hernandez confirmed as Fran lowered his rifle. This wasn't the first time Fran had carried out a mission like this. Falcon was his 18th confirmed kill. Yet, as always, there was no pride in the act, only a grim sense of duty. Lives had been saved today, and that was enough. The distant hum of a Black Hawk helicopter broke the stillness as it approached to extract the team. Fran glanced back at the compound as they prepared to leave. Soon, the desert's ever-shifting sands would erase all evidence of their mission, as if it had never happened. For over a year, Fran had lived in this barren wasteland, enduring sleepless nights, sandstorms, and constant danger. His rifle had become an extension of himself, but the real burden wasn't the weapon, it was the longing for home. When Fran finally returned, Emily's face was the first thing he saw. Her wide eyes fluttered open, and a bright smile lit her face as she ran toward him. "Daddy," she cried, throwing her arms around his neck. He held her tightly, his throat tight with emotion. "What's going on, sweetheart? Why do you have this?" He gestured toward a small medical bracelet on her wrist. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Emily said softly, her voice carrying a fragility that broke his heart. "Just a little sick. The doctor said I'll get better soon." Fran's brow furrowed as a wave of unease settled over him. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Where's Mommy?" Emily hesitated, her small hands twisting nervously. "She's out." "Out where?" Fran pressed gently. Her lip trembled, and tears welled in her eyes. "With her boyfriend. Liam." Time seemed to stop. Fran froze, his jaw tightening as the words sunk in. "Her boyfriend? What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emily sniffled, tears spilling over as her voice broke. "I heard Mommy talking to him, she said she loves him." Fran closed his eyes, steadying himself against the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He knelt down to Emily's level, his hands resting firmly on her shoulders. "It's going to be okay, baby girl," he said softly, though his heart was breaking. Later that evening, Fran made a decision. He called Child Protective Services. "CPS, this is Priscilla Rich. How can I help you?" a calm voice answered after 2 rings. Fran took a steadying breath. "My name is Fran Heron," he said. "When I returned from deployment, I was met with a sight that crushed me. My daughter, Emily, was frail and sick, clearly neglected. Her mother, Claire, seemed to have abandoned her responsibilities, consumed instead with her new boyfriend, Liam. I couldn't let it continue. I needed help. Desperate, I called Child Protective Services. CPS, this is Priscilla Rich. How can I help you?" Her voice was calm but professional. "I just came back from deployment," I began, my voice tight with controlled anger. "My daughter's been neglected. Her mother's more focused on her boyfriend than Emily. I need help." Priscilla's tone shifted immediately. "Where are you?" I'll come to you right away. Within 30 minutes, she arrived, clipboard in hand. I laid it all out for her, Emily's condition, the neglect I'd witnessed, and Claire's disinterest in her own daughter's well-being. Priscilla listened intently, nodding as she took notes. "The 4 is a good start," she said, looking at the setup I'd managed for Emily. "But we'll file for custody immediately. You need to document everything, texts, calls, and any evidence of neglect." I exhaled deeply, my anger tempered by a growing sense of relief. "Thank you. I just want her safe." "She will be," Priscilla assured me firmly. "We'll also process a restraining order tonight. I'll schedule follow-ups to ensure Emily's safety." After finalizing the necessary forms, Dr. Brown arrived to examine Emily. His demeanor was kind but serious as he conducted a thorough check. "She'll need more tests," he said after a long pause. "Bring her to the clinic as soon as possible." That night, the confrontation came. Claire and Liam returned, their arrogance palpable. As they stepped through the door, I stood my ground, recording the encounter on my phone. "Emily's safety comes first. You need to leave now." Liam sneered, his voice dripping with defiance. "You can't just kick her out. This is my house too." "This is about my daughter," I said, my voice cold and firm. "Walk out now, or I'll call the police." Claire stepped forward, eyes blazing. "What are you going to do, Fran? Shoot me?" I held her gaze, my tone calm but with an edge that left no room for doubt. "Don't test me. Walk out now, or the police will handle it. Your choice." Claire hesitated for a long moment, then turned sharply on her heel, dragging Liam behind her. "You'll regret this," she spat over her shoulder. "Maybe," I replied, my voice ice cold. "But not tonight." When the door slammed shut, the silence was deafening. I sat down, my body heavy with exhaustion, my mind racing with dark thoughts. Revenge tempted me, but Emily's face always brought me back. She needed me now more than ever. I couldn't let anger take me away from her. Hours passed as I wrestled with my emotions. Eventually, exhaustion dulled the sharp edges of my rage, and sleep crept in. The last thought on my mind as I drifted off was simple but profound. Claire was gone from our lives, and she would face the consequences for what she had done. The news of Claire's dismissal from her job came a few weeks later, delivered in the cold formality of an email. She sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the screen, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Liam paced behind her, his frustration bubbling over. "Maybe we should have thought this through," he muttered, his tone biting, "before blowing up your marriage." Claire didn't respond, her silence a heavy acknowledgement of the truth. Their once bright future was now uncertain, stripped of stability or security. For the first time, she felt the depth of her loss, not just her career, but her family, her reputation, and the respect of those who had once stood by her. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from a counselor in a small, quiet office. My posture was rigid, hands clasped tightly in my lap. The counselor's voice was soft, her tone measured. "I can see you're in pain, Fran. Trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time. If Claire is genuine, wouldn't it be worth trying?" My hands gripped the chair tighter, my frustration threatening to boil over. "You don't get it," I said through clenched teeth. "She's not sorry. She's playing the victim, trying to paint herself as the one who's hurt. I see right through her lies." The counselor leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but resolute. "Healing takes effort, Fran, from both sides. If you're unwilling to try, this pain might never leave you." I looked away, my thoughts swirling. Healing? Maybe. But not now. My focus had to be on Emily. Nothing else mattered. Claire needs to show she's committed to rebuilding trust, but if you shut the door completely, it might damage Emily's relationship with her mother, the counselor said gently. Fran's eyes narrowed. I'm a Marine. I've faced worse than this. If Claire wants a chance, she'll have to earn it. The tension in the room was thick, and the counselor let the silence linger before replying, her voice steady but firm. Fran, stop. This path you're considering, it's reckless. It could undo everything you've been fighting for. I don't care anymore, Fran said coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. Claire deserves to face the consequences of her actions, and this is how it's going to happen. The counselor sighed, a mix of frustration and concern etched into her features. You're walking a dangerous line. You could lose everything, your stability, your daughter, everything that matters. Fran's jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly. I'm not asking for permission, he said sharply. I'm doing what needs to be done. The atmosphere changed when the heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. The door opened, and a man strode in, his very presence commanding attention. He stopped in front of Fran, his expression unreadable. The boss wants to see you, the man said in a gravelly voice. Joseph, Fran's longtime confidant, immediately tensed. He grabbed Fran's arm and whispered urgently, this is it. Don't do it. Walk away while you still can. But Fran remained calm, his resolve unwavering. He nodded to the man. Lead the way. Joseph's protests died as Fran silenced him with a glance. There was no turning back now. They were led into a dimly lit room, thick with the scent of cigars and lined with heavy velvet curtains. At the far end sat an imposing figure, his demeanor exuding menace. Mike, a man Fran had worked with in darker times, regarded him with a mix of curiosity and danger. Your enemies are my enemies, Mike said, his words heavy with implication. Joseph stiffened, his unease palpable. Fran met Mike's gaze, his mind already calculating the next move. A faint plan began to form, dangerous but precise. He knew Claire would never see it coming. Fran spoke, recounting the ordeal, the betrayal, Claire's lies, and Emily's neglect. Every word dripped with bitterness, the raw pain unmistakable. Mike listened in silence, his face darkening with each detail. When Fran finished, his voice was ice cold. I have a plan. Something that'll destroy them without anyone ever suspecting me. Mike's lips curled into a dangerous grin. That's the Fran I know, always thinking 2 steps ahead. All right, we'll play it your way. Tell me what you need. Joseph leaned back, rubbing his temples in frustration. I'm in, he said reluctantly. But we can't afford any mistakes. Every angle has to be covered. Fran nodded, the weight of his decision settling firmly on his shoulders. There won't be any mistakes, he said with finality. This ends now, on my terms. Mike raised his glass in a cold toast. To making things right. Meanwhile, Claire sat at the kitchen table, gripping her coffee cup tightly. Her voice was flat as she addressed the men in the room. I'm not reconciling, she said bitterly. I'm filing for divorce. I'll get the house, and then I'll sell it. One of the men studied her, his tone cautious. Even if you file for divorce, you might only get half. Courts usually split assets evenly. The rest stays with him. Claire's jaw clenched tightly, her frustration simmering. Half, she hissed. Why should I settle for that? The room fell silent, the weight of her choices pressing down on everyone present. Whatever came next, it was clear, Claire had chosen her path. And so had Fran. I'll settle for nothing less, it's my house, Claire snapped, her voice sharp and full of entitlement. The second man shrugged, his demeanor cool and detached. That's not how it works, Claire. Unless you can prove something that gives you leverage, you're looking at a 50-50 split. The first man leaned forward, his gaze sharp and calculating. You don't need the money yet, he said smoothly, his tone carrying an undercurrent of suggestion. But we know someone who can help. Claire's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Who? The quieter man finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. Mike Baker. He's your guy when the banks won't play ball. But let me be clear, he doesn't forgive debts, and he doesn't hesitate to collect, by any means necessary. The color drained from Claire's face as her stomach turned. Mike Baker, she repeated, the name barely above a whisper, a mix of disbelief and fear flickering in her eyes. I've heard of him. He's dangerous. The man's expression remained unflinching. That's the price of getting what you want. 2 days later, Friend sat stiffly in the waiting room of the counseling office, his hands clasped tightly together as he stared at the floor. This was supposed to be a joint counseling session, but the thought of it left a bitter taste in his mouth. When Melinda, the counselor, approached him, her face was carefully neutral. Mr. Heron, she began, her tone measured, I've asked you before if you're willing to give Claire another chance. Reconciliation is possible if both of you are open to it. Fran scoffed, shaking his head with a faint smirk. Lady, reading textbooks and running mock scenarios might make sense to you, but this isn't your life. You're not the one cleaning up the mess she made. Before Melinda could respond, the door opened, and Claire walked in with an air of defiance. Her outfit was provocative, too much so for a professional setting. A low-cut top and a skirt that barely passed for decent made her entrance feel more like a statement than a willingness to reconcile. Melinda greeted her, though her smile was strained. Claire, welcome. Let's begin. Claire cut her off sharply. Spare me the formalities. Let me talk. Melinda faltered, her professionalism cracking under the sudden tension. Claire turned her full attention to Fran, venom dripping from her voice. He wants a divorce. Fine. I'll give it to him. Just give me the house, and we're done. Melinda gaped at her, visibly caught off guard. But Claire, you said. Fran's cold gaze shifted to Melinda, his expression silently conveying his disdain for the counselor's inability to grasp the situation. You don't get it, do you? He said, his tone smooth but edged with frustration. This isn't about reconciliation. It's about power, control, and ensuring I get what's mine. Melinda opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Her eyes, pleading and full of desperation, met Fran's. Please, Fran, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can help you. Fran cut her off sharply, his tone commanding. You'll do as I say, right? You think this is about healing? Think again. Claire's forced smile reappeared as she folded her arms. I've decided, she said smugly, her tone carrying an air of finality. You'll see things my way soon enough. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Whatever the next steps were, it was clear, they weren't about resolution. They were about war. I only want the house, Your Honor. It has sentimental value, Claire insisted, her voice steady though her confidence wavered under scrutiny. Judge Parker's irritation was palpable. Sentimental value? For a house you neither maintained nor respected, he retorted bluntly, his tone sharp. Let me make this clear, you'll get 50% of your claim, nothing more. If you want the house, you'll pay Mr. Heron's price. This court does not indulge entitlement. Claire's confident facade cracked for a brief moment, but she quickly masked it, her voice rising with indignation. I'm not giving up that easily, she snapped. Meanwhile, Claire's pulse quickened as she paced the small apartment, the phone pressed tightly to her ear. France isn't going to wait. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Liam's voice crackled over the line, disbelief clear in his tone. 600,000. Are you sure this will even work? We don't have a choice. Claire snapped back. Mike is our only option. If we don't get the money immediately, the house is gone. Liam sighed heavily on the other end. Fine. I'll set up the meeting, he replied, though his hesitation was clear. The tension in the room was thick as Claire and Fran faced each other across the table. A stack of paperwork sat between them, the weight of their decisions tangible in the silence. Claire pushed a check across the table, her fingers trembling slightly. 600,000, she said, trying to project confidence, though her voice wavered. For the house. Fran glanced at the check briefly before slipping it into his coat pocket. His expression was unreadable, his silence unbroken except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Claire hesitated, then spoke again, her voice soft. I'm sorry. Fran looked up, his eyes meeting hers briefly, but he said nothing. The apology hung in the air, unacknowledged, as the room fell back into silence. Later that evening, Claire sat on the apartment couch, swirling a glass of wine in her hand. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the liquid as she leaned back, trying to shake the weight of the day. Liam lounged beside her, his arm draped casually over her shoulders, a smug smirk playing on his face. This might all work out after all, Claire said lightly, staring into her glass. Liam chuckled, raising his drink. The house, the money, or finally being rid of Fran? Claire smirked, her tone laced with satisfaction. All of it. Everything's finally coming together. Liam raised his glass in a mock toast, but before they could celebrate further, Claire's phone buzzed. She frowned as she read the message, her expression darkening. What is it? Liam asked, his smirk fading. I need to know what's happening, Claire muttered, grabbing her purse. Without another word, she stormed out, Liam reluctantly following. They pulled into the address from the business card, but what they found wasn't at all what they'd expected. A garish neon sign blinked overhead, casting harsh light onto the nearly empty parking lot. The words, Wild Nights Gentlemen's Club, glowed in bold colors, stark against the darkness. Claire stared at the building, her jaw tightening as she gripped her purse. This can't be right, she muttered. Liam stood beside her, just as stunned, though a smug grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well, I guess Mike's full of surprises. Claire whispered, dread creeping into her voice, a strip club, are you kidding me? Liam cursed under his breath, pacing. A strip club? This has to be a joke. Claire's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her face twisting in disbelief. Her mind raced as she pieced things together. You don't think Fran was behind this, do you? Liam hesitated, then nodded grimly. Those guys knew too much about the house and the deal. It adds up. He must have been setting us up the whole time. Claire froze, anger replacing her shock. He played us, she spat, her voice rising with fury. That fool conned us both. He'll pay for this. Liam crossed his arms, his expression dark. We should have seen it coming. But we didn't. He outsmarted us. Determination hardened Claire's features as she grabbed her phone. I'm not done yet, she muttered, her voice filled with resolve. I'll make some calls. We're not losing everything. Desperation drove Claire to accept a lowball offer on the house just 3 days later, selling it for half its value. She transferred the funds to Mike immediately, hoping it would be enough to end the nightmare. But her relief evaporated when another message appeared on her phone, not enough. You still owe me. Claire's stomach churned as she read the words, her hands trembling. What more does he want, she muttered, frustration cracking her voice. Mike's demands didn't relent, and Claire's desperation grew. Turning to Liam, her voice wavered, tears threatening to spill. I don't know what else to do. We sold the house. We're out of options. Liam stared at her for a long moment before stepping closer. His voice was cold and unyielding. You're right. We can't do anything about this, but neither can he. He needs to pay for what he's done to us. Claire hesitated, the weight of Liam's words sinking in. He'll pay, she said quietly, her resolve hardening. That night, Claire and Liam sat in their dimly lit living room, finalizing their plan. The tension was thick, and Liam fidgeted nervously, unable to sit still. This still feels wrong, he said, his discomfort evident. Claire leaned forward, her voice firm. We're not hurting her. This is leverage. Fran needs to understand what it feels like to lose everything. Liam's eyes darted to the photograph of Emily that lay on the table. Her frightened eyes stared back at them, making Claire's stomach twist with guilt. This isn't right, Liam said softly. Claire ignored him, her jaw tight. It's the only way. The next night, Claire and Liam sat in their car, parked in a secluded spot. The streets were empty, the air heavy with tension. Claire raised a hand to silence Liam as he began to fidget nervously. I'm not handing over money without proof, Fran's voice came through sharply over the phone. Claire exhaled slowly, willing herself to remain calm. You'll get proof when I see the money. That's the deal, she replied, her tone steady despite her racing heart. Beside her, Liam's eyes darted anxiously between the back seat, where Emily sat, and the dark, empty streets. His panic was palpable, but Claire raised her hand again, cutting him off before he could say something that would escalate the situation. There was a tense pause before Fran's voice returned, sharper and more commanding than before. 700,000. You'll have it. But I want the location now. Claire's pulse raced as she stepped out of the car, the chill of the night biting at her skin. Her breath clouded in front of her, and she glanced back at Liam, her expression unreadable. This was the moment they'd bet everything on, but the cost was already far greater than she'd anticipated. Claire reached into the back seat, her hands trembling as she pulled the bound girl upright with Liam's help. The two of them moved cautiously toward Fran, the air thick with tension. Fran took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as his gaze darted between them. Let me see her face, Fran demanded, his voice sharp. Claire hesitated, her breath catching as she exchanged a nervous glance with Liam. Slowly, she reached for the mask covering the girl's face. With shaking hands, she pulled it away. The moment the fabric fell, Fran's expression darkened, his features twisting with fury. Who the hell is this? He barked, his tone cutting through the cold night air. The girl, clearly a stranger, looked terrified, and Fran's eyes locked onto Claire with unrestrained rage. Behind him, two of Mike's enforcers dragged a man from the shadows, his face battered and bloodied. The man pointed a trembling finger at Claire and Liam, his voice barely audible over his sobs. They paid me to do it. It was them. Mike's piercing gaze never left Claire as he approached, his footsteps slow and deliberate. His voice was laced with venom. You screwed up, lady. Claire's breath hitched as panic gripped her. I didn't mean to. Mike silenced her with a sharp interruption. You tried to abduct your own daughter and extort money from Fran. That's not just a screw-up, it's a death sentence. The menace in Mike's tone was unmistakable, and the presence of his men, standing silent and watchful, confirmed that this was far from a negotiation. Claire's chest tightened as she realized the gravity of her mistake. Mike stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You've got your reputation, and I've got mine. But when someone comes after my family, my daughter, it's personal. There's no walking away from this. Fran stood still, his expression cold and calculating, but he didn't flinch. He understood the severity of Mike's words. This was the world they lived in, where every decision came with a price, and Claire had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Later, as Fran stood by Emily's side, the weight of the night's events seemed lighter in the peaceful moment. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him back to reality. He hesitated before answering, stepping aside to give Emily some space. Fran, he said, his voice steady but alert. Hey, it's Joseph, came the cheerful voice on the other end. I just wanted to thank you, man. Things with Melinda went great. She's incredible. I owe you for setting us up. Fran smirked faintly, his tone cool. Glad it worked out, Joseph. You're a lifesaver, really, Joseph added, his gratitude evident. Fran's eyes drifted back to Emily, her small figure safe and sound. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to exhale the chaos behind him, at least for now. The story ended differently for Claire and Liam. On a remote dock, the air was bitterly cold, the wind howling as Mike's men stood guard. Claire and Liam knelt on the concrete, their hands bound, faces pale with fear. "You don't have to do this," Claire gasped, her voice cracking as she pleaded. "Please." Her cries were met with silence. Mike's enforcer stepped forward, his face unreadable as he gripped the backs of their shirts. With a single, deliberate motion, he shoved them toward the edge of the dock. "No!" Claire screamed as they tumbled into the dark, frigid water below. The icy sea swallowed them instantly, and the weight of the concrete tied to their legs dragged them into the abyss. The cold bit into their skin, but the true weight was the realization of their actions, pulling them down as the world above faded into darkness.